Hi, this is Elaine Benfield, and welcome to another episode of Her Stories. I have a fabulous guest, Paula Lowe. Welcome to Her Stories.
Thanks, Elaine. Always glad to connect with you.
So, I've interviewed Paula before, as some of you might remember. We talked about mediumship. We had a great conversation about that. But today, on International Women's Day, I thought it was so appropriate to have someone who exemplifies being a woman, a friend, someone who's inspirational, and someone who has more resilience than pretty much anyone I've known. I've known Paula, as some of you know, for a long time. And what I really want to focus on, I think women have a lot that they go through in life. I think you especially have had a lot of things that you've had to overcome the last few years. And I want this, just a little bit of stuff. But I really want us to be inspiring for, kind of the younger generation that doesn't understand there's so many things that can happen in life, and how do you overcome that? So that's the topic. I said before, without trying to get weepy, you've always been such an advocate for me and our friendship, and being colleagues and then become friends and whatnot. So I'm super happy to have you and talk about something that is really near and dear to my heart, is survival and resiliency. So with that being said, so tell everyone, who is Paula Lowe?
Oh, gosh. Well, so many things, right? I recently did a LinkedIn post talking about humanity and authenticity. I am a daughter, a mom. I'm an unemployed person, but I'm working hard. I'm scrappy. I'm a fighter. I'm a friend. I'm a significant other. I'm all those things. I'm a human.
Yeah. No, it's true. And I think that leads into, I think a lot of us, where we land today, our childhood is a basis for the situations we've had.
Absolutely.
Can you go back to, I know your story through us being friends for so many years. Talk a
Yep.
little bit about, your childhood and things that you had to overcome as a child, and honestly leading into like a child of divorce.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. My parents were very young when they got together. My mom was, I think, 13, maybe even, when she started to have this crush on my dad. She was friends with my dad's sister. And so she had seen my dad, and my dad was like, "Oh, you're jailbait," because he was 6 years older. You fast forward through time, they ended up together. And I guess the polite way to say this is my mom's birthday is in April. And 9 months later, her birthday present was me, if you count April to January.
Yeah.
So, I was a little bit of an oops, but they were madly in love. They got married. Well, as you can imagine, being that young, things didn't work out. And so they were divorced when I was around 4. I think I remember them saying.
How old were you when your mom had you?
How old was I? How old was my mom when she had me?
How old was your mom? Yes.
She
How old
was
was your mom?
18. She had just turned 8. Yeah, I think she was 18. So she was young.
Young. Yeah.
And it was, her parents didn't like my dad. They didn't really want her to go through with this pregnancy, but she didn't want to give me up for adoption. She felt strongly. So here I am. And then I'm 4 years old and they're getting a divorce. And back then, that was early 70s. Divorce wasn't as rampant. So It was challenging. And I was the child from the broken home, which at 4, I didn't know. But what my parents did was they ended up getting back together after, I think, a year and a half of being apart. So I was about 5.5 or 6. They got back together. They never remarried, but they got back together, and they were together until I was about 9. And when I was 9, it was a very ugly, very challenging breakup for them, in that I was exposed to some of the adult issues going on in their life at 9 years old. And I was an only child. I still am. So it was hard to go through without anybody else really there. And there was a lot of back and forth from 9 till about 16, where I lived with my dad. I lived with my mom. My dad had a significant other after a short while that I didn't care for, and that was a challenge. My mom got married a second time, and I never liked him, and he brought some drama to our home, and their divorce was now the second divorce, third breakup that I was going through with somebody. There was a lot going on. I was never necessarily abused or neglected, but there was a lot of stuff. And at one point when I was in high school, I had gone through some challenging stuff.
Yeah.
And I think you and I have talked about this in our friendship, right? Here we are as parents and adults. Life throws you curveballs that you never see coming. You think you're going to stay married. You think you're going to always have a job. You don't think addiction's going to affect you. And then all of a sudden, as an adult, you're dealing with it. So I recognized after a while that my parents were not on the pedestal I thought they were. I mean, as a kid, your parents are everything.
Yeah.
The day I realized they're human beings and they're flawed, I went, wow, I can't expect this of them. And so
you do get more of an appreciation, I do think, and I do want to mention your B mom,
my grandmother,
your grandmother, who I knew, and just like there's something about this woman, but she was a really great supporter of yours.
Oh, my biggest fan.
Mean, she really was your biggest fan. And like, that was a relationship that I always admired. And I had it with my grandparents. Mine just died, unfortunately, when I was younger. And I always remember her just support and the way she looked at you. And while you didn't have your parents together, I felt like you had that other parent in her way that was just such a great supporter of yours. And I think it's a great lesson that, sometimes you have your parents help, but you also have the grandparents, you have the aunt and uncles and other people as well.
Right. And interestingly, I'm glad you brought up my B mom, because I could do no wrong. I was the firstborn grandchild. My aunt had a son. I think when I was like 15, she finally had a child. So by then I had this incredible bond and my grandpa too. He was not great with little kids, so we didn't start to connect until I was in my teens, and he died shortly thereafter. But the interesting thing is, alcoholism runs in my family. And as a little kid, as much as I had my grandparents and I loved being at their house, and the story, my mom is now living in that house. Thank God. I wanted it to stay in the family. It was my constant as a child when everything else was very sporadic and lots of moving parts. But my grandparents were alcoholics. And there were times as a little kid, I felt a little insecure being there because I knew they weren't in their right mind and I didn't understand it. But I did always feel loved. And my grandmother, as I got older, it was my mom, my grandmother, and I called ourselves PBJ, Paula, Joni, and B Mom, or Paula, B Mom, Joni, PBJ. And my mom and her mom were never super close. It was tough, but I was like that glue
between
I think
them.
To some extent.
Yeah.
And my grandmother was just my everything. I adored her, and she adored me, and she gave me, when I was sick in school and my mom had to work, because back then there weren't a lot of moms that were full-time working. There was no one else to watch me. So thank God, most of the time I was at my grandma's house. She and my grandfather, provided that stability, which was amazing. And I think that's a lot of what got me through my childhood, was having that address, that phone number, the bedroom in their home. That was always the constant, always the constant, even if other things were in flux.
So then, Paula, you ended up getting your associate's degree for 2 years. You started working, and then you got married, and then more curveballs came. So let's talk a little bit about that. Kind of the life that you thought you had, the life that, we all envision, me included. Talk a little bit about that time, as you were evolving into someone working in the workforce and getting married and everything.
Well, so, going back to talking about my B mom and my childhood, right? My mom couldn't be there. My mom was a young working mom trying to build a career. She didn't go to college. My dad didn't go to college. So I knew college was important. I knew I needed a 4-year degree, but because of being between my two parents and child support and bickering, I just wanted to be independent. So I chose to go for my associates only so I could just start working and run my own life. I quickly realized, although I had some success with my degree, that I needed to go back to school. So I left full-time employment quickly, got a job at an environmental engineering firm as a full-time employee where I would have tuition assistance. I worked there. I was with the guy I met in college. We were together for many years. I think it was 5. We broke up for a year and a half. He called me, want you back, want to be with you. I said, I don't want to do this. Like, let's just, if we're not going to talk marriage, it's not worth it. I want to eventually have kids, have a family. He's like, no, I want you. So fast forward, now we're married. I'm working full time, going to school at night for my bachelor's, and I get lucky and I have the gut instincts that make me good at PR. I'm succeeding without a bachelor's, and I start missing classes because I'm traveling for work and I'm climbing the corporate ladder, which is great. So I say, you know what? I got to stop going to school. I can't do both. And I have the career I want. So I was doing that. And then I got married, and I should have known there were some issues with my former mother-in-law not caring for me, and there were some challenges, and I thought we could overcome those. It continued to be an issue in my marriage, in my opinion. And, but I was committed and I wanted to be married. And my now ex was supportive of, look, if we're going to have kids, one of us has to be able to stay home. Yeah. And it didn't matter to either one of us necessarily who stayed home, as long as, someone had the benefits and could carry the family. When the time came for the two of us, it made more sense for me to go out on my own because I could still work and make really good money. He couldn't do what he did from home part-time and raise kids. So we did that. That was successful until I got pregnant with my second baby. But between those years, the first son and the second son, which was only 2 years, 9 months, the economy tanked. We had, people my clients were bringing stuff back in-house. There were mergers, there were layoffs. And then we had 9/11. And by then, my ex was working in Plymouth, commuting an hour and a half one way, so 3 hours a day in the car. And we were looking at relocating to the southern part of the South Shore of Massachusetts at that time. But 9/11 put a screeching halt. So finally, a couple of years later, we were ready to move. We did that. And the challenges that we faced were, we knew we were going to be a little tight moving into this house down there, but we had a year to pay off the car. I was going to continue to do some part-time work. I got a job at Target. And then shortly after we moved there, his company said, we're having layoffs and pay cuts. And he didn't get laid off, but his pay was cut 10%. We were already super tight. And then the car that would have been paid off died. The engine seized and died in the middle of the night while I was working my part-time sales job. And I had to call for him to come get me. We had to get a new car. So you have these unforeseen things and 2 babies at home. So it presented some financial challenges that put a lot of pressure on the marriage. And it made things hard. I thought things were okay. We were working together. And come to find out after several years and in a therapy session, he admitted that he was unfaithful. I guess not all the way physically, but somewhat, which in my book, whether it's physical, emotional, it doesn't matter. If you're checked out, you're checked out. And although he went through the motions of therapy for a few years, I think he was just checking the boxes to say he did it. And that was a challenge. That was so hard for me because having gone through divorce, I had said to him, if you don't change this, if we don't work together, everything we built for this family is going to be gone. And, we can't do this. It's not sustainable. We'll end up divorced. And unfortunately, he took that as me threatening him. You're threatening that we're going to get divorced. I'm like, no, I'm being very real with you here.
Yeah.
This is not
trying to save the marriage. Yeah. Trying to save the marriage. Yeah.
Yes. And so when ultimately he said, I don't want to do this anymore, that was another huge challenge for me. And I guess I should back up a little too, because we're talking about resilience, right? So one of the things that happened when we were getting ready to move from up near the Worcester area in Mass, this would have been around the 02, 03 timeframe, my B-mom, who we just discussed, had COPD and lung cancer, and she was dying. And I told my mother I was selling my home up in Worcester area, building a home an hour and a half south, having to run out and meet with the builder, meet with vendors, choose things for the new home, take care of it, packing up a home and a toddler, plus being pregnant. And I was having some complications with the pregnancy, nothing major, but things that were of concern.
Yeah.
And I told my mom, when things are really bad, you call me, I'm coming. And she said, Paula, you're 7-8 months pregnant. What if it's 2 a.m? I said, I don't care. I'm going to be by her side. And I got that call at like midnight, and I drove to Connecticut 2.5 hours, and I sat by her side until she took her last breath.
Yeah.
And there was so much emotion there. It was so hard. My midwife at the time said to me, "I'm worried about you." My mother-in-law was being a bit intrusive. I was digging deep in my faith. I was going to Bible study. I was just working hard on trying to stay positive and upbeat, feeling incredibly stressed physically, emotionally, but also a lot of excitement. I was building the house of my dreams with my husband. I was having a second baby. I was like really
But you
working
and I,
hard.
well, and I think it's interesting. You and I both, my father, I was 20 weeks pregnant with my second child when my father died. And I remember the same in the hospital. Everyone's like, she's going to miscarry. And I remember like holding my dear life of like, whatever I have to do, it's the last thing my dad would want is to lose a baby. But I was so distraught. But I had
Yep.
a toddler at home and a stepdaughter. But I remember that it's that inner strength that they would want us to continue. B mom would want, but it was that, B mom never met, Owen.
Right.
My dad never met Alexander.
Right.
And there's so many qualities that I think both of our youngest have of that person. That I
Yeah.
do think it's so bittersweet. I think you
Yeah.
have the same, like there's certain qualities that B mom had that really, Owen has. And I feel that way with Alexander, with my dad. And I
Yeah.
do think, it's just God, those times to get through that, you can't, I think, unless you go through what we did, you cannot comprehend,
Right.
being
And this
pregnant
is
is
it.
hard enough. And it's like
Right.
going through such a turmoil, you know.
Right. So there you are,
So
you're pregnant. Your hormones are surging, your body is changing. For me, the complications were this incredible tachycardia where my midwife was like, "We need to get you an EKG. We need to, like, this
yeah,
is not good." And it was just, and so I got through it, right? It was hard. My grandmother died in May. I had to pack up and move out of my house in June. I went to stay with my mom and stepdad with a newborn and a toddler from July through September, with my husband coming down on weekends and staying with friends up near work during the week. We did it. We got through it. It was okay. We got into our new home and it was brand new and beautiful, and we were both so excited. And there I was. I would be cooking at the stove at night, bawling my eyes out, going, "Why am I crying?
yeah,
I'm sitting here with a beautiful home and two beautiful babies, and I'm home with them." That was my dream, was that one of us would be home. And my kids, I didn't have the ability to send my kids
yeah,
to one of the grandparents like my mom had. So it had to be one of us. I just felt so strongly about not putting my kids in full-time daycare. And I know some people do, and that's great.
yeah.
And in some ways, I think, wow, maybe my kids would have been better off having been there. I don't know.
But
You
I
can
do
always,
think, but I do think, Paul, like kind of jumping forward, like, you end up getting divorced. And
yep,
then, I always thought you honestly, in my opinion, had to start over again.
I
Like
did.
if you and I were peers at an agency, we were growing together, and I chose differently. I was like,
Right,
oh, I'm going to work. I'm going to have an agency. I had a nanny. And then I went back to corporate. I
right,
didn't have a blip in the radar.
right.
And that was my choice. And it was the way that I was a better mom because of it and whatever. I was always there, but I also had the flexibility. I traveled a lot, as you know, but I do feel, do you ever go back and go, because I think life is all about what ifs.
Of
And I
course.
do feel like where you would have been, because now we're going to get into like you had a lot more struggles because of the choice of being a stay-at-home mom.
I
And
did.
your kids are now, 20, 21 and 20, right?
Mm-mm.
20,
Andrew's 23, and
23. Oh my God, I'm so off. 23.
Owen will be 21
And oh, it won't
in
be
June.
21.
Yeah.
That's sorry, that's totally right. But
Yeah.
obviously. But it is, do you ever think, oh, if I didn't, because here you are divorced, you're a
Yeah.
mom with two little kids, you were 100% the caretaker. Like that's
Yep.
just, I was too. Like
Yep.
involved in school, involved in their sports, involved in everything. You were, you ran in, city councils thing. You did so many things.
Right.
When you look back, would you have done the same thing in that time? It's
It's
so hard.
always, yeah. So, funny quick aside, I'm actually presently in Ohio, and I'm right down the street from OSU. And I was taking a walk this morning, and I said to my mother, I walk by campuses like this and I think, gosh, I kind of wish I went for the 4 years front, but you can't. I
Yeah.
didn't. I did what I did.
Yeah.
And ultimately, when I ask myself, would I change it? No. because now here we are. My kids are 23 and 21. I miss them incredibly. This whole empty nesting thing is way harder than I ever thought it would be for a variety of reasons. I miss them so much
Yeah.
because they were in and out of my life on a daily basis.
And
So
all their friends too. Like you have what I have is like, there's times where I'm like, can I just have no one over?
right.
Can I not be, expecting someone to walk through the door and in my bedroom, and like you
Yeah.
are the same type of
I
mom.
loved it.
I
I loved
learned
it.
from you on that it's like, make your house a place where you want all your kids to go. And
Yeah. And
that's what you had. But you chose at that point, like, you go through divorce, your kids are growing up, you chose to go back to Connecticut from Massachusetts, which I also was in awe, where you're like, I'm going to pick up my life. I'm going to go back to my childhood area to be close to my mom. And that's also you had to then, your kids are at a great place, but it is hard. You sold your house that you had the kids in, that
yep.
you built, to then start again in another area.
Well, yeah. And it was, the years between were hard because I never wanted my kids when I got divorced. I asked my ex, I'm like, let me go back to Connecticut and stay with my parents. I can get on my feet. When he decided the marriage was over, we had one agreement. Things were going to go a certain way. He opted to completely change that agreement. You know this, but on the topic of resilience and sharing with people who don't, he messaged me on the last day of my vacation where I was away with my mom and my boys and said, when you come home, I'm leaving. He was supposed to leave in January after the holidays. This was September. I was scheduled for ankle surgery. I was going to be non-weight bearing for 6 to 8 weeks. I didn't have a job. And our agreement had been, okay, the marriage is over. We know it. We were sleeping in separate bedrooms by then. He was going to have one last holiday with the kids. We were going to get them started in the school year. And then while I was recovering, I was going to find a job. That rug got pulled out from underneath me and my head was spinning. And I had to stay strong for those boys. I couldn't let them see my turmoil. I was waking up at night with panic attacks and heart beating, and how am I going to make ends meet? What am I going to do? And he won't let me move. And how do I keep my kids here? If I can't move, I have to find a way to keep them in this house because that was their home and they needed that stability. So I was able to do that for them from the time, I think Andrew was about 12-ish when we got divorced till he graduated. And then when I told them all along, and this is the interesting part about being a parent, someday we'll talk a separate podcast about that, but I had always told them, this is a burden for me. This house is a lot of money. Yes, their father pays child support and helped, and he felt strongly. That's the one thing we did agree on is let's keep them here. But there were a lot of sacrifices. There were a lot of nail biting. There was a lot of work I had to do to get that house to where I could afford.
And a lot of jobs. Like you and I have been through so many careers together. We've also been to so many jobs that we've had horrific managers, gaslit bosses that tried to destroy us. You and I have had it. I think you've had maybe a little bit more share of it. And you still had to go in every day because you needed that paycheck. And you seriously, and I always joke with you that you are scrappy because you never gave up with those. Man, some of those moments were just tough because you knew it was teetering on how are you going to pay and do all the stuff. Well, Mark, your ex-husband was supportive. Still, it's not, you're still raising 2 kids on your own.
Alone. Yeah.
Alone.
I mean, he had them every other weekend, but even then there were weekends he'd at the last minute say, I have plans or, I'm dropping them off early Saturday or whatever the case was. Not always. He was pretty consistent, but
and he loves your kids. It's not, that is not,
he does.
He is a good dad, and it's just, but it is where I do feel there's a common theme. And I think women are so resilient because you and we're single moms.
Right.
And that it was a life. I didn't think I was having kids to be a single mom. And you lived through it as your childhood. I didn't. My parents were always together and they were married for 44 years. Yeah. But I look at, we're the ones that pick up the pieces. We're the ones that, get the good, bad, and ugly. And they're gone. And we used to joke, and I will say this truly, like, a lot of men are Disney dads, that they come and just swoop in for the fun. And we're like, did you do your homework? Did you brush your teeth? Did you do this? Did you get your meeting? Did you go to the doctor? And I feel like the resilience I learned from you, because your divorce was a little ahead of mine. Yeah. That you do you do everything. You work, you are a great cook. You always had dinners, and like that, to me, you created that safe environment for your kids. but there was a time where you were like, I need to go back to Connecticut. That's where, and I think it's the best decision you've made, but it's also been a hard decision.
It's been a hard decision. I mean, it wasn't strictly made by me at that point. We've talked about my spirituality, my intuition, my just sort of
Yeah.
manifesting things. And I believed that the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, would provide for me. So I had a great job I liked. It was a nonprofit. I wasn't making the money I needed, but if I could have kept that job and been remote, I wouldn't have changed jobs, but I had to look for a new job.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know if I was going to be able to stay in Massachusetts. My first preference always was to just downsize to something more affordable. And I didn't find it in Mass. And I had some aspirations of potentially returning home just because my mom and I are close, my mom and
Well,
dad and
close
my
to and
stepdad.
closer. I know that where you used to live, like, you weren't that far from the shore, but you loved the shore of Connecticut. And
Absolutely.
that's
I need
something
to
like
be
something near the ocean. That's who you are. And
yes.
every time I see a seashell, I think of you, like literally cannot not think of that. Um,
Oh, the water is my happy place for
the
sure.
water, it's so your happy place. So then you go through, you move to Connecticut, you're in this great house, you do it alone. I think some people know I flew to help you kind of unpack when you had like a pod in your, because I felt like here's this woman who picked herself up, survived a divorce, went through, raised her kids. They're now on their own,
Yep.
respectively with college and whatnot. But then, I remember looking at you going, man, you bought this house by yourself. You did it. And
Yep.
I'm a few years behind you, and I'm approaching that stage where it's like, oh my God, can I afford a house? Where am I going to move to? I need to downsize. Like, I've
Right.
learned a lot from you,
Yep.
and your resilience during that time. You found the right house, you found the right location. But do you ever, there's days where it's hard when you're like, my God, why is it so hard? Like,
Yeah.
I always joke with you that my parents did a great job. I didn't know life was hard. I
Yeah.
think it's the best thing they ever did for me, but also the worst thing.
Right.
Because these things, we never predicted this would be where our life is at this stage, especially, our age. And it's like,
Right.
you know, um, how do you feel? Because you've had jobs, but then to be honest, let's get into like, being laid off and being let go in a company.
Yeah.
You know,
So I had been laid off back in Massachusetts, but I got through it. Um, I network my tail off, and I have one of the mantras I've had for my children is it's not what you know, it's who you know. I've tried through the years, and I'm sure some people will say different things about me, but I've tried to perform my work with authenticity, integrity, professionalism, and many people think I'm really good at it. I tend to
and
think
you
I'm
are, and just from someone who's worked with you, one of the best PR people I've ever known. Like you taught me but it's true. Like you taught me the relationship aspect. I was new in high tech PR, and I remember we were in the IBM account together. And
Yep.
I remember learning from you not only client relationships, like my natural relationships, but the client piece, but then
Yep.
also the business piece. Like you taught me how to foster, external relationships. That was a lot of the guidance you had, just you had more experience at that stage. And I remember, that is to me, there's no one, when I think of PR people that have the relationship, and as PR has evolved, that's you still, it doesn't, these are the core foundations of what you do well. And it's the core foundations of public relations and influencer marketing and influencer relations and analyst relations. It's all, all interrelated.
Well,
They really
it's
are.
fun. Yeah. And it's funny that you bring that up because one of the most difficult editors, and I love to tell the story. You remember, you and I were in that little quad cubicle, and I was on the phone one day, and when I got off the phone, you said, "Who were you talking to?" And I told you, and you were like, "You talk like that?" Because he and I had been talking about his
Yeah.
children and his family, and I
Yeah.
said, "Yeah, that particular editor and I remain friends. We are still friends to this
Yeah.
day." And what's really cool is so I moved to Connecticut. I had gotten a brand new job
Yeah.
through someone we know from our former employer.
Yeah.
And I loved it the first few months. Then the company started to hit some bumps, and there were some cultural changes, and I could see the writing on the wall. I had gone out on medical leave for a couple different reasons and was addressing some physical issues I had been having and thought I was moving ahead, got through that, and then told them I was coming back and was expecting to go back. And at the very last minute, they said, you don't have a position. That rocked my world. At the same time, the short-term disability people told me, oh yeah, we paid you for your medical leave, but now you have to pay us back. At the same time, my ex had brought me back to court, and I had paid for a lawyer with home equity line of credit from my new house. I had all these mounting bills. I was really feeling like I was drowning. And
There's so much, and that's only like truly to say it's only the skim of it's the top of the surface,
absolutely.
because there's so many legal things as well. And the fact that I never understood, like, you have to pay child support and all these, like, it just, there's certain things that I think you and I've talked about, so often about the courts are not favorable to single moms. They're
No,
not favorable. And I think that you could be dishonest with certain paperwork and you're screwed for years to come.
right.
And the cost of lawyers, you
Yep,
cannot get out of it without an expensive lawyer. And
right.
it's a cycle. Like you and I've talked, I'm like, I wish I would have went to law school just to help women get through divorce
Yeah.
to not be screwed. And it's and that to me, resilience is not even the word. There's a stronger word for what you've had to overcome. And so you now have been looking, you're starting to do contract work, but you have, in consulting and whatnot. But it's been a long road of, you have applied for so many jobs, and the market's a fickle market, and we're also not 20.
Well, yeah, their ageism is very real. And I've worked with, unemployment agency consultants
Mhm.
and a variety of people on how I'm presenting myself. What does my resume look like? How many years is too many of experience where you flag your age, and how many are, I mean, there's a lot of people out there who do still want people like us. And just
Yeah.
looping back to that editor, one of the reasons I have the one consulting client that I have is him, because
Yeah.
when I lost my job, he made an introduction for me. And those relationships, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And he was so kind and has always been, and we help each other.
Yeah.
And so, unemployment ran out, and I never in my life thought I would say I'm using a food bank. I
Yeah.
didn't apply for SNAP because, oh, you make too much, but I'm like, that's unemployment. I don't make enough. I can't pay my mortgage. So, you know, on the topic of resilience, there have been days, this, and I share this because one of my true desires is to inspire others. Anyone who's watching this, who's struggling right now, I have had some of the darkest days of my life this past year and a half, 2 years. I have missed my children. My children have had their fair share of struggles with certain things they were promised and told by other people that never happened. They felt disillusioned that I left, and their perspective on me saying, I'm trying hard to keep you here, but I'm going to have to sell this house with you leave when you go to college, was you held the house over our heads. It's fascinating. It's like, that was never my intention.
My kids are doing it right now.
So hard when you, as a parent, you're like, no, that's not what I'm trying to say. But I know how I took
Yeah.
things that my parents did. And we all have our own perspectives. But, the interesting story for me is I've had to dig deep. I have had days where I have cried. I have days where I question my value and my worth. I have days when I say, am I too old and no one's ever going to hire me?
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, you know what? The one thing I am is a bit of a control freak. And I'm giving my control to everybody else by applying for these jobs that I'm getting nowhere on. So I'm going to take control and start my own business again. I had it when my kids were little. I have a lot to offer. I had to dig deep. Your confidence gets rocked when you get laid off. Your confidence gets rocked when you apply for hundreds of jobs and get nowhere. And I see it every day on LinkedIn now. More and more people saying the same thing.
And not even a call. What you and I have talked about too is, you can apply to jobs. They don't even let you know they're not interested. You can apply
Right.
for jobs, get interviews. They never follow up.
Yep.
It's kind of, it's that whole cycle of, it's really hard. And you and I've talked about weight. We've
Yep.
talked about like, it's so hard to overcome all these. And I almost feel like you and I've talked about, I always think of the analogy of, I love Linda Carter. I'm the old school, and I love the new Superwoman as well. But I love like Wonder Woman to me, Wonder Woman. I always think of an armor. We have things coming at us all the time, and our job is to deflect it, to try to survive, because
Yep.
we have all these things that you go, my God, when's enough? And there's days, like you've said, I've had those days that if it wasn't for my kids and truly my animals, my dogs, there's days where it's like, how do you get out of that darkness? Because you can't see the light ever in everything from financial to job to life to relationships. It's really, those are some of the darkest days you and I have had over the last few years. It's like when you think you hit rock bottom, oh no, the bottom falls out again.
Oh, yeah. But you know what, Elaine? You and I have talked about this too, and this is where I hope to inspire some people. I've been digging so deep, and I go to church every week, and I'm lucky to have a pastor who is not just religious but spiritual, and is just a true inspiration. And church fills me up every week. I take from it what I need. Um, and I have started working with a shaman, and I've been going to shamanic drumming, and I've been sort of just saying, okay, God, universe, spirit, you take over.
Yeah.
As much of a control freak as I am, I can't control this. What I can control is every day, do I take a step forward somehow?
Yeah.
And I do. And there are days I'm exhausted, and it's really hard to be motivated to go back and file pro se paperwork with the court when they tell me, oh yeah, you filed that 2 weeks ago, we never got it. Like it's stuff you and I laugh and say, you can't make this up. But the really cool thing is, after one particularly powerful shamanic drumming session, I had this profound visit from spirit one night. I was in the middle of an incredibly vivid dream, and all of a sudden I was aware of being awakened from this dream by this presence on my bed. And I was like kind of confused because I was sort of still in the dream, but I knew there was something over here. So I pulled myself kind of more alert, and I felt this gorgeous, bright, glowing orb of energy. And I felt like if it had a hand, it reached out and it touched me. And I heard in my mind's ear, if you will, it is done. And I was like, what's done? What? It's done? What's done? And then I realized these hard times, they're done. It's done. I've been praying, I've been asking, I've been surrendering. And, you know, since then, certain things have started to shake out, and I'm feeling more optimistic and hopeful. So the resilience comes from support from good friends like you, support from my wonderful significant other, the love of my animals, knowing that I need to continue to be a role model for my children. And I'm not going to just give up and curl up in a ball and become an emotional wreck, because that doesn't do anybody any good. My kids need me. And, you know,
And it is, you have to find something. And I think, you've helped me on my dark days, like do readings for me, you and I virtually, since we're in different states. You hear my voice, my text, my tone, and you're like, I've got it, I'm going to do a reading. That's amazing how that has helped me tremendously. I do think more meditation, learning to like find my zen.
Yeah.
And it is finding life didn't go the way I thought it would go, but it doesn't mean it's not a great new adventure. And it's just getting through that unknown, because you talked about it. You're a planner like I am. I hate not knowing. I don't know what the next door is going to open. And it is embracing that, because if anything we've learned, life is uncertain.
You have to trust. You have to trust that you are going to end up where you're meant to be. We may not like it. I don't like where I am right now. I don't like it at all. I don't like using a food bank. I don't like not knowing if I'm going to make my mortgage payment this month or not. I don't know. I don't like asking for this kind of help, but I'm not a quitter. I want to inspire. And you know what? Although I'm not where I want to be, I have a great significant other in my life right now who's more of a partner to me with a disability than many partners I've had in the past, including my husband. The love and support of good friends, my network, and just digging deep and saying, okay, this is propelling me to something I don't know, and it's scary and frustrating, but I'm going to end up where I'm meant to end up.
And I think that that's important, as we talk about the younger generation, don't give up.
Right.
You can, and I know we've seen both, and we were talking earlier about, LinkedIn. People are like, oh, I spent out 300 emails or 300 LinkedIn messages. And unfortunately, that's reality. It might be 301.
Right.
And that is what the world's like. And you have to keep pushing forward. And honestly, as we talk about being scrappy, like if it doesn't turn this way, it doesn't work. Like you said, okay, you're having a hard time getting back to the corporate America. Well, you're doing a great job by being, finding your clients and leveraging your amazing skill set that any company would be lucky to have. And that's where I do feel you need to find your own self worth
Yes.
to do what you know is right for you. And, I think, and surviving what you and I have with really, I'll go back to having really hard bosses,
Yep.
really. And no matter how they kicked you down, I think I almost learned from them even more of the survivor skills and being resilient. I mean, I know we're saying that word 1,000 times, but it
Right.
is, those people taught me that they can't break me.
Right.
I am strong. I'm going to survive and thrive from that. And whether
Mm-hmm.
that be, not only employees, but like friends and ex-husbands and whatnot, that, you can knock me down enough, but I will always get back up.
Yeah. And I think, at the end of my marriage and with some boss, any relationship, someone can say words to you that you give meaning. And I think, I'm highly sensitive. I care about people. I care about being liked. I care about being perceived as kind and professional, but I'm me. And there are
Yeah.
times when people have said, you don't have enough gravitas, or my ex-husband has said, you don't know how to be in a marriage. You're from a divorced family. And I'm like, actually, there's a saying, every time you point a finger at me, there's three pointing back at you. And
Yeah.
so I've learned over the years that sometimes when people are pointing fingers, they're not necessarily
Yeah.
things I have to own. I
Yeah.
want to improve. I care about getting stronger and better. And some of those challenging bosses have made me better.
Agreed.
But sometimes you have to recognize that when someone's speaking to you or saying negative to you about you, it's not necessarily all about you. Some of it's
Oh,
their own stuff.
I've learned that. As the last few years, it's like, wait a second.
Yeah.
I was told by someone that, it must be from your trauma of your childhood. And I was like, I didn't have trauma. My sister and
Right.
I had a whole conversation with my sister and we're like, what trauma? We had the
Right.
great, one of the best childhoods I could have wished for, wouldn't really change anything about it. And
Yep.
that's a lot to say. I had great parents and you
Yep.
appreciate them. I think, unfortunately, in my experience, more when they're gone almost. Um, but it is picking yourself back up and, everything we talked about and learning from all these moments. I do want to highlight, like, you're still finishing up your bachelor's degree, which I
Never
think
given
is,
up.
but I think it's one of those, you're like still doing it because it's something you said you're going to do. And there's been semesters which are really hard and I've just seen that, but that you're never giving up. And I think that degree is such a great importance as well for you because you want that. And I just think it's amazing.
Thank you for that. Yeah. And it's, the message there for me is to leave for other people is it doesn't matter. You can set a goal. You can set a goal and
Yeah.
say, I want to be this weight. I want to get this degree. I want to go to this country and I want to do it by X time. Well, sometimes it's not on our time. And so
No. Yeah.
I don't care if I'm 85 in a wheelchair. I'm going to get that piece of paper that says I have a bachelor's degree. I will do it because I said I was going to. I am
You're going
determined.
to do it.
And,
Yeah.
sometimes.
Well, yes, sometimes. And it's interesting. I think you said something that I think in the end, who's to know what our journey is?
Right.
And I think in your mind, even as a child, you think your life's going to go a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever way it goes, it's never going to be the way you thought. And
Right.
if you don't learn to adapt and find a way to deal with whatever circumstances around you, you're going to be unhappy your whole life because life doesn't go the way. If anything we've learned, life is never the way you thought. It's not a straight line.
Nope.
It's not a straight road.
And the thing is, I worry about the current generations, like the young generations younger than us that grew up with remote work, with being behind a screen, because you see a face, but even when my kids were in middle and high school, there's bravado behind sending a text or being on social and saying something and not having that accountability. But also when you're alone, when I have felt very alone these last few years, I'm fighting these battles that I don't necessarily want my kids to know about, even though they're adults now. But I'm fighting these battles, and I'm trying to defend myself against things that I shouldn't have to defend myself against. We know this, but it's okay to say you need help. And I worry that some of these kids that grew up behind the screens are afraid to say, I'm struggling, I need help. It's
Because they don't
okay to,
have, and it's okay to say it, but I think that's something that, you and I have so many close inner circle friends and colleagues that have become friends. And it's so, but we all grew up together in person,
correct.
and we just found the strength that, as we joke, like, I know your tone. I know the first word you say, I'm like, how's her day? I know. And you do the same for me.
Yep.
And I do agree with you that it's like, I know they're finding their new ways to adapt. And I know that the question always comes back to, like, oh, are people going to go in the office and whatnot? I just think I had to be in the office. People are like, oh, well, now that yeah, I'm 51. I've been in the office. Like, I'm not saying
Right.
I miss my colleagues, love seeing them, love hugging them, whatever. But I had 25 years of working in an office.
Right.
I've had my bruises. I have my commutes. I've had you and I joke with someone, I'm like, yeah, there was never a calling in. You and I had to do clip reports. 6 a.m. I was on a train. You and I lived near each other at one point. We had
Yep.
clip reports due to our client IBM at 7 a.m. Period. There was no wiggle room. That was what we did every day, Monday through Friday.
Yep.
And I still went out the night before, but I never called in sick.
Right.
Because we were expected to do these things, and we were in the office, and we all, had that. You and I can talk forever. So I'd love to ask, as you know, I always ask people, kind of leading to each other, what empowers you and what inspires you? Because I think it's kind of a branch between the two topics, but, inspiration is one thing, but you also have that inner empowerment to help you. So I'd love to hear, what are your thoughts on those two kind of closing questions?
So I don't remember if I shared this on our first call, but for me, what empowers me is faith. And it's interesting. I wasn't raised in a very religious household. I didn't go to church every Sunday. My mom took me to church Christmas, Easter, a couple times a year. My dad always talked about the Bible. But I remember in high school, my guidance counselor, after some particularly challenging times, said to me, Paula, how are you getting through this? I mean, you're not turning to drugs. You're not copping out. You still show up to school. Well, I was social. I liked school. I wanted to go be with my friends.
Yeah.
But one day I was in a store and I saw the Footprints in the Sand poem about the man who felt alone and asked God, why did you leave me alone? And God said, child, you weren't alone. I carried you. And something in that struck a chord in me. And although I'm not sure I fully believe in God as a man figure over the years, I believe there's a great universal power that we're all part of. And there is a higher power that can carry us through. And that faith has served me well, and that empowers me. And in my darkest days, I pray, I talk to spirit, I just trust that things will work out. And I've had experiences where I've panicked. I've been in a moment of, this isn't going to be all right. And then when I can step back, I realize, wow, I really was taken care of during those moments. Had a recent one, as you know, in New York with some scary stuff, and everything worked out. It got taken care of. So it's having that faith. It's stepping back in those moments of panic and anxiety or desperation, going, I have faith. This is going to be okay.
And you've taught me that because, as everyone knows, I grew up, half Catholic, half German Catholic, half Jewish, American Jewish, however you say it. And I was split between, I love religion in so many ways, but I also realized religion was a part of wars.
It's a lot of source.
But you've taught me to embrace, that there is something, that when I'm in my darkest moments, I found recently a letter from my dad. Haven't seen it in 25 years. And there's those pieces that do keep you going. And it's finding that whatever, believing in something that helps you. And you've taught me more the spirit side of there is something that, I'm being protected somehow. I don't know. And during my really horrible moments, I knew my parents were around, to help
They
me.
always are. They always are.
They always are.
That's been my journey, even, with my mediumship and knowing I still believe in it. I still have moments where I think, like, how does this happen? Or this isn't real. But then I get a message, or I have something happened and I go, yep, thanks for the affirmation. And it's just that beauty of just believing that we are being carried in those days when we feel most alone. That's where my empowerment comes from, is just that hope and that belief that
Yeah,
they're
that's
there
so
with
awesome.
us and we're going to
What
get through it.
inspires you? What inspires you?
What inspires me? Gosh, I should have known you were going to ask this. I did know you were going to ask this. I don't know that answer. What inspires me is helping other people, is feeling like I might make a difference in this world. If I can make a difference to one person somehow, if I can turn someone's day around. You know, I remember saying to my son when he was little, there was a boy on the bus that drove him crazy. And that little boy I knew came from a difficult family. And I said, honey, if he wants to sit with you, if he says good morning to you, smile at him and say hello. You might be the one person who lets him feel seen all day long.
Yeah.
That's what inspires me, trying to make a difference, trying to make someone else's life better.
And it's such a perfect summary of who you are, because you do make a difference. You make a difference for so many people. And I hope people listening, like, have resilience. Don't give up
Yep.
on yourself. You're going to be thrown at so many obstacles in life. And we're
Yep.
two great examples that we're happier now in our current states than we were many years ago. And we didn't know it at the time.
Right.
And, I see a really bright future for you. And just, as I say, I'm so happy you're on this journey with me, because you've been so inspirational, and I've learned to be a better mom because of you, learned to survive divorce because of you. So there's so many things, and you inspire me every day. So I'm thankful. I miss you. I can't wait to hug you in person. As everyone knows, I'm such a hugger. And Paula gives the best hugs, by the way.
You've always said that.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paula. I know you're busy. I really appreciate you taking time. And I will post how to contact Paula, especially for the mediumship. And then if you are interested in having an agency for PR and marketing, can't even recommend her any higher. And thank you, Paula. And I look forward to another conversation we need to talk about. There's so many other things we could talk about.
We could talk for hours. I love you. Good to see you.
I love you. Thank you so much. And
Bye.
stay tuned for another episode of Her Stories.